Bill Gates storms off The Late Show after Stephen Colbert's relentless mockery pushes the tech billionaire past his breaking point. What began as playful banter escalated into a heated exchange that left the audience stunned and social media ablaze. The studio lights dimmed as Stephen Colbert's familiar figure strode onto the stage of The Late Show. His trademark grin was slightly sharper tonight, his eyes glinting with something the regular audience might not have immediately recognized. The band played him in with their usual enthusiasm, but there was an electric tension in the air, something different about tonight's show. Welcome everybody to The Late Show. I'm your host, Stephen Colbert, he announced, straightening his navy blue tie. We've got a fantastic show for you tonight. Our guest is a man who needs no introduction. Billionaire, philanthropist, and someone who spent decades trying to convince us he's not a robot. Bill Gates! The audience erupted in applause, unaware of what was about to unfold. Colbert settled behind his desk, shuffling his notes with unusual deliberation. Before we bring him out, I want to share something interesting I learned today, Colbert said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Did you know that Bill Gates' foundation once spent $4.8 million to develop a super banana? Not a banana that flies, around fighting crime. Though that would be cool, but a genetically modified banana with extra vitamin A. Imagine being so rich that you wake up and think, you know what the world needs? A super banana. That's the kind of eccentric billionaire energy we're dealing with tonight. The audience laughed, but there was an edge to Colbert's delivery that hinted at something more than his usual playful sarcasm. When Bill Gates finally walked onto the stage, he wore his characteristic mild-mannered smile. Dressed in a simple, dark sweater over a collared shirt, he waved politely to the audience before taking his seat. They exchanged pleasantries, Gates commenting on the energy of the crowd, Colbert nodding along with practiced charm. "So, Bill, it's been a while since you've been on the show," Colbert began innocuously enough. "You've been busy with, well, everything. The foundation, climate change initiatives, and I hear you've been trying to reinvent the toilet?" Gates nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, it's actually a critical project. Nearly 2 billion people worldwide don't have access to basic sanitation." Right, Colbert interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "The Bill Gates toilet experience. I've heard about this. You spent what, $200 million on this project? $200 million to reinvent something that's worked pretty well for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, I spent $40 on a bidet attachment from Amazon. And let me tell you, it's revolutionary." The audience laughed nervously. Gates's smile tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, these aren't conventional toilets. They're designed to function without sewage infrastructure and—" "So basically, you're selling very expensive porta-potties," Colbert interjected. "Got it." Gates blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard by the host's unusually aggressive tone. "Not exactly. These toilets process waste on site, eliminating pathogens and—" "Let's move on," Colbert cut in again, flipping through his cards with exaggerated disinterest. "Your mosquito laser system. You built a laser that shoots mosquitoes. Out of the sky, right? Like a tiny Death Star for insects?" Gates attempted to smile. "It was an experimental project looking at ways to combat malaria." "But it didn't work," Colbert pressed. "You spent millions on a Star Wars mosquito defense system that never materialized. Don't you think that money could have been better spent on, I don't know, actual medication for people who need it?" The tension in the studio was palpable now. The audience had fallen unusually quiet, sensing that this wasn't the typical late-night banter. Gates shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his expression hardening. "Our foundation actually spends billions on medication distribution and healthcare infrastructure," Gates responded, his voice measured but with a hint of irritation. "The experimental projects represent a small fraction of our overall investment, and innovation requires—" "Speaking of investments," Colbert interrupted again, his smile now distinctly predatory, Let's talk about Common Core. You pumped about $200 million into reshaping America's education system with an approach that, by most accounts, was a spectacular failure. Teachers hated it, parents were baffled by it, kids were stressed by it. But hey, at least you got to play education czar for a while, right? The audience gasped audibly. Gates' face flushed red, his normally calm demeanor visibly cracking. That's a gross mischaracterization, Gates replied, his voice tighter now. Educational reform is complex, and while there were implementation challenges— Implementation challenges? Colbert repeated incredulously. Is that billionaire speak for, we messed up but don't want to admit it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided you knew better than every education professional in America, threw money at a problem you didn't understand, and then quietly backed away when it all went south. Gates took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. The studio had fallen completely silent now, the audience watching with a mixture of discomfort and fascination as the exchange grew increasingly hostile. Stephen, I came here to discuss our current work on climate change and pandemic preparedness. Not to— yes, pandemic preparedness, Colbert exclaimed, slapping his desk with theatrical enthusiasm. Let's talk about that TED Talk you gave years ago, warning about a global pandemic. You've been making the rounds taking credit for predicting COVID, but when it actually happened, where was all this preparation you talked about? Where were the systems you claimed we needed? For someone who saw it coming, you sure didn't seem to have done much to get us ready. The camera caught Gates' knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Behind his glasses, his eyes had narrowed to slits. The audience was witnessing something unprecedented: the methodical dismantling of one of the world's most powerful men on live television. That's absolutely unfair, Gates finally responded, his voice quivering slightly, with barely contained anger. Our foundation has been one of the largest funders of vaccine development and global health initiatives for decades. We've committed billions to COVID response efforts. The fact that governments weren't adequately prepared despite warnings from many experts, not just me, is hardly— Is that why you're buying up all that farmland? Colbert cut in, his tone accusatory. You're now the largest private farmland owner in America. What's that about? Preparing for the apocalypse? Building a feudal kingdom where you can be the tech lord and the rest of us can be your digital serfs? The audience was no longer laughing. Some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, others watching with morbid fascination. The producers could be seen conferring urgently behind the cameras. This was clearly not the interview anyone had anticipated. Gates set his jaw, his patience visibly evaporating with each passing second. The agricultural investments are about sustainable farming practices and— Right, Colbert interrupted once more, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Just like your nuclear reactor project was about clean energy before it failed spectacularly, or your population control initiatives in developing countries that some have called neo-colonial at best and eugenic at worst. It's fascinating how many grandiose projects you start that either fizzle out or create more problems than they solve. Bill Gates stared at Colbert, his expression unreadable for a long moment. The tech billionaire, known for his mild manner and careful public persona, seemed to be undergoing an internal calculation. The studio held its collective breath. You know what, Stephen? Gates finally said, his voice deadly quiet. I think we need to take a break. The audience shifted uncomfortably as Gates reached for his water glass, his hand trembling slightly. Colbert's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his aggressive facade, before he recovered with a tight smile. A break? We're just getting started, Bill. The viewers at home want substance, not the carefully crafted PR lines you feed to every other interviewer. Off camera, a producer made a slashing motion across her throat. The red light on camera 2 blinked urgently, but Colbert, either ignoring the signals or consumed by his own momentum, pressed on. Let's talk about Windows Vista, Colbert continued, his voice taking on an almost gleeful edge. Remember that disaster? The operating system so bad it became a punchline for years. You sold millions of people an unfinished product and then charged them to fix your mistakes with Windows 7. Gates set his water down with deliberate care. That was after my day-to-day involvement with Microsoft, as you well know. But technology development isn't linear. We learn from failures? You've had plenty of learning opportunities then, Colbert interjected. Zune, Microsoft Bob, the Windows Phone. Your company has a remarkable track record of spectacular flops. A muscle twitched in Gates's jaw. The studio audience was witnessing something rare. The calculated dismantling of a public persona built over decades. Someone coughed nervously in the third row. The Foundation's work has saved millions of lives, Gates countered, his voice gaining an edge rarely heard in public appearances. Malaria deaths down by nearly half since 2000. Polio nearly eradicated. That's what matters, not obsolete tech products. Ah yes, your foundation, Colbert said, leaning forward. The perfect tax shelter masquerading as philanthropy. You do realize that people can see through this, right? The billionaire trying to rebrand himself as humanity's savior, while avoiding taxes that might actually help fund public solutions to these problems. The producer was now frantically signaling from the wings, but Colbert appeared determined to continue his onslaught. Our foundation has given away over $60 billion to date, Gates replied, color rising in his face. Tax benefits don't come close to offsetting that investment. We're putting our money where it can do the most good. Your money, Colbert emphasized. That's the point, isn't it? You get to decide the world's priorities. Vaccines, but not healthcare systems. Agricultural technology, but not land reform. Education reform without consulting educators. One man appointing himself global problem solver without any democratic oversight. Gates's nostrils flared. The audience could see him struggling to maintain his composure, his breathing visibly controlled. You seem to have a fundamental misunderstanding of how philanthropy works, Gates said, his voice dangerously level. We partner with governments, NGOs, and community organizations. We don't dictate solutions. We fund promising approaches based on data and evidence. Right, like your microfinance initiatives that left poor women in India so deeply in debt that hundreds committed suicide. Was that evidence-based philanthropy? Colbert's delivery was relentless. Or your foundation's investments in fossil fuel companies while you preach about climate change? The hypocrisy is stunning, even for a billionaire. The studio felt like a pressure cooker. Camera operators exchanged nervous glances. The audience sat frozen, witnessing what was clearly an interview gone horrifically off the rails. That's a gross distortion, Gates managed, his voice tight. We divested from fossil fuels years ago, and our microfinance work has helped millions escape poverty. Cherry-picking isolated incidents to craft a narrative is dishonest journalism, Stephen. Dishonest? Colbert repeated, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. That's rich coming from the man who crushed competitors with monopolistic practices so severe the government had to intervene. How many innovations did we lose because you strangled them in their cribs, Bill? Gates' face had turned an alarming shade of red. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as if fighting a sudden headache. Let me be clear, Gates said, replacing his glasses with precise movements. I came here in good faith to discuss important work that affects millions of lives. Instead, you've ambushed me with half-truths and outright fabrications for what? Ratings? Twitter engagement? This isn't journalism or even entertainment. It's character assassination. The commercial break signal flashed urgently, but Colbert waved it off. Oh, please, Colbert scoffed. You've spent millions crafting your image as tech's good guy. Your PR team works overtime to bury stories about your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein or your bullying management style at Microsoft. The public deserves To see behind the curtain! A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The producer was now physically approaching the stage, her expression panicked. Gates froze, his expression hardening into something the public had rarely seen: raw, unfiltered fury. "That's it," Gates said, standing abruptly. "I didn't come here for this." "Sit down, Bill," Colbert insisted, his tone condescending. "You can't run from difficult questions just because you're used to controlling the narrative." Gates stared down at Colbert, his voice dropping to an ominous whisper. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "None." "I think I do," Colbert retorted. "Your vaunted malaria vaccine? Still not widely deployed after all your promises. Your nuclear reactor company TerraPower? Burning cash with no results. Your climate book? Full of techno-optimism but light on. Personal sacrifice. It's always the same story. Big promises, mediocre delivery, and no accountability." The tension in the studio was unbearable now. The audience watched, transfixed, as Bill Gates, one of the world's richest and most powerful men, stood trembling with barely contained rage before the grinning talk show host. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" Gates said, his voice unnervingly calm despite his visible fury. "You've confused cynicism for intelligence. It's easy to tear things down. Building something, anything, that's the hard part." Colbert leaned back in his chair, seemingly unfazed. "Is that what you tell yourself when your projects fail? That at least you tried? The world doesn't give participation trophies, Bill, especially not to billionaires playing savior." Something shifted in Gates' expression, a coldness replacing the anger. He reached up and deliberately unpinned his microphone. "I've sat here and listened to you mock work that has saved millions of lives," Gates said, dropping the microphone onto the desk with a sharp clack that reverberated through the studio speakers. "You've distorted facts, taken statements out of context, and ignored decades of measurable impact, all for what? A viral moment? Congratulations. You got it." Colbert's smile faltered slightly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as he realized the interview had spiraled beyond his control. "Come on, Bill. Surely you can take a little criticism. For someone who's appointed himself the world's problem solver, you seem awfully thin-skinned." Gates shook his head, a look of genuine disappointment replacing his anger. "This isn't criticism. It's character assassination dressed up as comedy. I expected better from you." "What you expected was another fawning interview where you could recite talking points about your latest world-saving initiative," Colbert shot back, but a note of defensiveness had crept into his voice. "The public deserves to see the real Bill Gates, not the PR version." "The real Bill Gates?" Gates let out a mirthless laugh. "You don't know the first thing about me or what drives me. You prepared a hit piece, not an interview. The production's crew was in visible disarray now. A network executive had emerged from backstage, conferring urgently with the floor director. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence, witnessing the unraveling of late-night decorum in real time. "Your AI investments," Colbert continued, doubling down despite the chaos unfolding around him. "You've poured millions into technology that could eliminate countless jobs while positioning yourself as a champion of the poor. The cognitive dissonance is staggering." Gates stood absolutely still for a moment, then turned toward the audience. "I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight expecting an actual conversation. Clearly, that's not what this is." He began walking toward the exit, ignoring Colbert's protests. "That's it? You're walking out?" Colbert called after him. "The moment someone asks tough questions instead of lobbing softballs, you fold? What happened to the ruthless Bill Gates who demolished competitors without blinking?" Gates stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back to face Colbert one last time. The studio lights caught his glasses, momentarily obscuring his eyes. "You want to know the difference between us, Stephen? I'll be up at 5 a.m. tomorrow working on eradicating polio. What will you be doing? Planning your next ambush to boost ratings?" An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the audience. Colbert's face flushed red, his practiced television persona cracking under the weight of Gates's parting shot. At least, I don't have the arrogance to think I can solve problems that have stumped humanity for centuries just because I got rich selling software, Colbert fired back, his voice rising. Your Microsoft tax failure in Washington state showed exactly how much you really care about public solutions versus your own ego trips. Gates shook his head one final time. I can't do this. Good night. With that, he strode off the stage, disappearing behind the curtain. The audience sat in stunned silence. For several excruciating seconds, the only sound was Colbert's microphone picking up his agitated breathing. Well, Colbert finally said, adjusting his tie with uncharacteristic nervousness, I guess billionaires aren't used to being questioned. We'll be right back after these messages from people who actually finished the interview. The applause sign flashed desperately, but the audience's response was tepid and scattered. As the cameras cut away for an emergency commercial break, Colbert could be seen arguing heatedly with producers who had rushed onto the stage. Backstage, Gates brushed off attempts by the show's staff to persuade him to return. I've never been treated with such disrespect in 30 years of public life, he could be heard saying as security escorted him to the exit. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media. Gates' walkout began trending, quickly followed by Shocker Colbert ambush and late show meltdown. Celebrity reactions poured in, dividing sharply between those condemning Colbert's tactics and others praising him for challenging one of the world's most powerful figures. By morning, the confrontation had dominated news cycles. Media analysts debated the ethics of the ambush-style interview, while late-night competitors alternately distanced themselves from or aligned with Colbert's approach. The network executives convened an emergency meeting as advertisers began expressing concerns. Gates released a measured statement through his foundation. While I welcome robust discussion about our work, last night's interview was not conducted in good faith. I remain focused on the issues that matter: fighting disease, reducing poverty, and creating opportunity for the world's most vulnerable people. Colbert, facing the most significant backlash of his career, offered a carefully worded non-apology on the following night's show. Television interviews should be challenging. They should make powerful people uncomfortable. If that's a crime, well, I plead guilty. The incident would be analyzed in journalism classes and media studies programs for years to come. A moment when entertainment crossed a line, when the carefully maintained facades of both a beloved television host and a philanthropic titan cracked simultaneously under the hot studio lights, revealing something raw and unscripted beneath. In the end, both men returned to their respective empires, one to his foundation campus in Seattle, the other to his renovated Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. But something had changed. A threshold had been crossed, and somewhere in the viral debris of their collision, difficult questions about power, accountability, and the role of media lingered, unanswered.